And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a newcomer into the temple, creator of the Brachyr system, and the person who I unfortunately misread the name of the thing when I put up the schedule on Sunday. The one and only AtlasSniperman. How you doing today, man? Or this? Well, technically would be today in your case. It's more tonight in mine.
I'm doing good. You asked beforehand if you had the pronunciation right, and then mispronounced it immediately upon introducing it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Brachyr system.
Yeah,
There's no
Brachyr.
N in that.
I don't know why I keep seeing an N. Though I have a feeling I'm not the only one who's made that mistake.
It's the first mistake I've seen of it, so you're a pioneer.
I suppose. But it's a tradition around here to open up with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, with that in mind, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
I mean, you're basically asking for my life story by saying that, but I'll put it as going on a trip to visit a family member and playing RPGs with them for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first introduction for it when I was like 8 or 12, somewhere around that age. And yeah, I've been interested in ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time I was stuck with the D20 lineage of games.
Mm-hmm.
I went through starting at like the first one I played was AD&D First Edition, and then jumped to D&D 3.5, then 4, then down to Pathfinder. I've been all over the shop in that brand, and I've also jumped through other systems just because I find it fascinating how people are setting up rules, and I just want to know more about the logic that goes into the designing of rules, and that's one thing that I've very much latched onto with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
My first GMing was fresh out of high school, running 2 12 to 16 hour sessions a week. And at that point, like, you go through testing all the side rules. And you look into everything and see how everything balances out. Because why not? You've got 16 hours a day you're playing this fucking game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, swearing's fine, right?
Yeah. I don't get on anybody for swearing.
Okay. But yeah, it's like at that point there is no prepping a game like that. You have to understand how the rules work and how players work and why rules are the way they are, and that's the sort of thing I latched onto in games, and it's the sort of thing I've been wanting to know about a whole bunch of different systems, and yeah,
mm-hmm.
that's how I got into it. I got into it from family, and then the deep end.
Yeah. Now, Brachyr is I suppose you would consider it a universalist style game. So I'd like to play a bit of word association. I'll give you the names of a few games, and you can tell me if it's one that you had read through, played, some experience regarding it, some hot take on it, that sort of thing. Consider it the worst Rorschach test you'll ever take.
Oh, okay, sure.
GURPS.
It's the kitchen sink. The broken kitchen sink out on the back lawn.
Hero System / Champions.
They have so many supplements, but I haven't read enough of it to make a judgment call on anything particular.
Savage Worlds.
That's a subsection of Deadlands, and it's so massive that it's its own. It's effectively its own genre, like D&D 5e has become. So, I mean, it's just a big system.
Which is amusing, given that it's at its core pretty damn simple.
Oh yeah, that's why it's diversified so much, because people are picking up and going, I'm going to twist this into this little bit, add a couple rules of my own, a couple things for flavor, and call it a new subsetting or sub game.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Cypher.
I haven't played much of Cypher, but I did give it a read, and it's got some interesting lore in the lore stuff, and I don't really think that the lore matches up particularly, like it doesn't mesh well with the rules. Other than that, it seems interesting.
Wait, lore with the Universalist end, which did you
there are lore books that are added for like various Cypher like settings, and they don't really mesh well with the rules.
All right, I just had to clarify it in my head, because we're
fair.
dealing with Universalist games, and
yeah, no, I know.
So,
but there are lore in some of those, yes.
Yeah.
And people would put a lot of lore into Cypher system, but it doesn't match with the mechanics, and so it can get a little clunky in some places, as far as what I've read personally.
Mm-hmm. Fate.
I have run a couple Fate sessions. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I do like some of the mechanics and how it does feel a lot more. There's a lot less effort on the storyteller. I think it's the storyteller that they call it.
I just go with GM just because I'm not paid by the syllable.
That's fair. The GM, it does have a bit less weight on the GM's side of the thing, because it's mostly just call and response in like the ad lib sort of situation. So that's an interesting version.
I can see it, though I've been critical of a guidance issue that I've had with it regarding the whole aspect thing, because I don't think it does a good enough job establishing where the line is when it comes to the types of aspects.
Yeah, that is an issue that I see in systems where you can create a piece of rule for yourself.
And 13th Age was able to sidestep that problem, though, because the core book has a sidebar just going into a bunch of different examples, and between decent ideas, ones that are kind of pushing it, and absolutely not.
Is that first or second edition? Because I haven't read much of either.
First edition. Second edition still isn't out yet.
Okay.
But what about Genesis? The one spelled with a Y.
Oh, the one spelled with a Y? No, I haven't. I haven't played that. I haven't read that. Unfortunately, I do have it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bad case of collecting systems.
I think everybody does, even if they don't want to admit it.
I like to think of it as I'm preserving the act of creation, the effort people have put into making this stuff. I'm preserving it even if I don't have the time or energy to read through all of it. I know it's safe.
Mm-hmm. Say the last one I'd bring up here is, even though it doesn't have a Universalist book per se, so I am kind of cheating, but Gumshoe.
Interesting. I actually haven't read much of Gumshoe. I see it come up a lot when I'm grabbing stuff for other systems. Yeah, I can see why it would be called a universalist, but I haven't read much of it myself, no.
Although,
I'm also not sure if... Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about gumshoes personally.
yeah, it is. Admittedly, even though I use the term universalist, that's just a way of categorizing a bunch of these multi-genre ones that are built around that kind of thing.
Yes. And
Gumshoe, for even with all the different variants thereof, but it does have its foot firmly planted down in putting it building it around investigation. That was one of the key things from the word go.
Well, yeah. That's certainly something I should have a read of then.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think the first one proper was Trail of Cthulhu, which was doubling down on an investigative aspect. But now, with that in mind, with some games, they end up leaning into multi-genre just through iteration, and some are built with it from the ground up. With Brachyr, was that one where you wanted it to be a setting or genre agnostic affair from the word go, or did it just kind of happen that way?
I wouldn't call it setting agnostic. It has a setting baked into it, but genre agnostic it's more to the case of I don't want to slap a single genre on it because I like all these genres, and I want to make a world that fits those genres all up. And it just so happens that doing so makes a system and a setting that just looks genre agnostic. Because I've got cosmic horror that's not specifically not Lovecraftian. I have cosmic horror in there. I've got fantasy, Renaissance.
Would you say then that you have a kitchen sink approach?
No. I've definitely got the world that I'm working on, and I'm not trying to make it cover every concept. Mm-hmm. There are some concepts that just work better elsewhere. I'm not going to try and do sci-fi in this thing because the setting just isn't conducive to it, so I'm not going to try.
Mm-hmm. Which is fair. I mean, there are some that can straddle that line, but that is like walking a tightrope.
Yes. And if some settings or systems you'll see try it and utterly fail, and others that don't try it, but the fan base tries to push it on the system and complain when it doesn't work.
Which I end up being reminded of that meme of the otter that's disgusted with the watermelon he's eating, but he keeps eating it.
Yep. Yep.
But I think one of the big things to kind of get on with is with character creation, for instance. It is a very wide affair, and
yes,
because of a lot of it focusing so much on powers as one of the major steps. Have there been instances of analysis paralysis, and how do you minimize that?
I have minimized it as much as I could. In the book, every skill has its list of abilities you can pick, and it's 3 tiers of 7 abilities. There's supposed to be 9 tiers of 7 for every single skill. And when I was doing the initial playtests, sat down players to build a character, and they look at this thing that's 44 skills, each with 63 options in it, they just froze up. Can't do anything. So I chopped out 2/3 of every skill. Mm-hmm. So it's just the first 3 tiers going into the core book, because that helps narrow it down for people. you're not looking at so much. And the other thing I did is I made it so the species themselves kind of act like classes in like the traditional D20 sense, in that they give you a guidance on how to set up your character. If you have no other option, if you have no other idea what to do, you just take a bunch of things from your species, and that gives you a generally rounded character who you can progress in those skills later. Of the playtests so far, a solid third of the players naturally gravitated to that approach without me bringing it up.
Yeah. So even with that, it does appear that that when it comes to powers and the like, you do have it kind of separated into a few subcategories. Putting aside the miscellaneous, there's species, debate, and species. Actually, no, I scratched that on species. I don't know why I said that. Debate, combat, and magic.
Yep.
And regardless of what someone's picking, each of these is operating on that tier-based power system. If I've got it correct, would it be fair to say that these are akin to a I was gonna say skill tree, but there's not really as much of a linking from one skill to the next in the strict sense of a lot of skill trees you'd see in video games or in some tabletop games.
I think the closest approximation I have seen and used is Skyrim. How it's got those perk trees for each of your skills.
Yeah.
And so you've got the group of things that are the combat ones, the magic ones, the stealth ones. And that's roughly the kind of categorization or genreization of the skills in the Brachyr system. You've got the combat skills, you've got the magic skills, the debate skills, the miscellaneous skills, and then you've got the species. And yeah, it's the basic grouping concept. It's not they're not interwoven, but they do interact with each other more than they interact with the other groups.
Yeah, I will admit I was also reminded of a alternate casting system that's in 5e and Pathfinder called Spheres of Power / Spheres of Might, and more recently Spheres of Guile. Which is more of a... I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, but it's more of a talent tree-based design on casting, and then just doing its own version of that for martials and skill-based characters.
It's... Yeah, that would be a rough approximation, yes.
I especially ended up thinking of it because of the fact that you have the opportunity for different types of spellcasting your magic traditions in how you have it set up, which I appreciate because you've probably seen this, and I know I have. There's plenty of times in fantasy games where magic is treated as a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of that. Like one of the first things to come to mind when I think of not that, explicitly a fantasy setting or concept where it's not one size fits all for the magics, is annoyingly for me the Wizarding World by Rowling.
I could see that. I've also seen a lot of people bring up pretty much most of the magic systems that are in the Cosmere universe from Sanderson.
I haven't read Sanderson. I have a difficult time focusing on his books. I'll read it and then get 5 pages through and go, wait, when did I turn the page? Shit, I've got to backflip and yeah. I have a problem parsing at that pace. Not sure why.
You'd probably get a kick out of the graphic audio versions of his work then, which is just taking his work and turning it into an audio drama.
I'll certainly give it a try.
But with his particular system, with this particular magic system, each one there's a bunch of subtypes within it, even though they're operating on a similar core, but the way that core is expressed is different for each type. Like the different types of allomancy and the effects that they have. It is still you're consuming a metal and then burning it to do some sort of effect, but the type of metal and the type of effect is different for each one.
Yeah,
is kind of the thing with that, and same thing with the Stormlight archive with how Stormlight works. It's not a 1-to-1, obviously, but you have that same all roads lead to Rome kind of thing.
Yep.
Although I suppose it's a case of Rome leads to all roads, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's the network node, and everyone's like driving around near it. They're just not quite getting there.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, that's also why I find it interesting that within this system, there isn't an equivalent of spells per day or anything like that. It's the limitations for magic are based on the type of magic that's being used.
Yes. Some of them are spammable, but not particularly strong.
Mm-hmm.
One is very strong and very spammable. It's just difficult to get to that point.
Yeah. And of course, each one has its own associated mechanics as well as tools. And this is as good as finding to bring this up. A major part of the system, as has been seen, is the idea of tool dice and getting an extra die size based on a bit of equipment. A lot of games will have this as a static modifier when it comes to using certain tools. What prompted going with a die size?
That is going real down to the weeds of when I started making the system. Mm-hmm. It was like originally a dice pool system where I just wanted to see how dice pools worked in like analyzing other systems, and I found that of the dice pool systems, very few were like most dice pools where you have a threshold number on any given die, and you count how many things are above this threshold number.
Yeah, the
very
head-based
few
approach.
Very few are a sum total, particularly of multiple dice. You get those mostly in systems like D&D or Pathfinder, where it's just damage dice.
Yeah.
Are you
familiar with Legend of the Five Rings? Because it also does a sum-based die pool.
I am not. I am not.
L5R's
how big does it actually get?
L5R's approach is known at, and I'm specifically referring to the editions before the most recent one, which is a symbol-based affair, and that's a different matter entirely. But for the longest time, it operated under a system called roll and keep. The idea is you roll a some amount of die equal to your attribute plus your skill, and you keep a number of die equal to your attribute, and then add those together and compare that to a target number. With the added wrinkle in that 10s explode.
Okay.
It's all D10s, 10s explode. Depending on how you build a character, you can have it that 10s and 9s explode, but that's late game stuff.
Yeah.
And
that sounds like a Yahtzee system, kind of, doesn't it?
I'd say the closest we got to a Yahtzee system was Weapons of the Gods / Legends of the Wulin.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep.
Where it's not really about rolling individual die over a threshold, but rolling sets.
Yeah.
Which probably could have been a lot more swingy if it weren't for the fact that you can bank die that you're not using.
Yeah, but with the Brachyr system one, I don't know why I initially went that route of having like multiple dice steps. I do know the reason I kept that is because of the particular dice step system I came up with, being like a +1, then D4, D6, D8, D10, because that maps fairly easily in the brain to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if something needs to be ad hoc stated by the GM, they can just rate it on that scale and give you the appropriate die step.
Yeah, so to put that into practice, I'd like to go through the die steps from lowest to highest, and you can tell me what sort of tools would be an equivalent die for that.
Okay.
Starting with D4.
So a D4 is like the most common one I can think of is the wrench. A wrench would be a great D4 one because it's good for a lot of things, but it's not great at anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good like bashing thing. It can be used to get yourself leverage on things. It's just good in general, but not great at anything.
Mm-hmm. All right, so D6.
D6 is like a good sword can obviously be a D6. What would it be? Like a decent non-magical kitchen would count as a D6 tool for cooking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But so do most basic spells that give you some form of benefit, like a basic jump spell would be a D6 for checks to jump.
All right.
It's the minimum threshold for magic for most cases.
All right. D8.
D8 is the good stuff. It's a magic sword or a high quality spell. It is by definition magical. Mm-hmm. It's the good magic shit.
Yeah. All right.
And then D10 before you bring that up.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
D10 can't be grabbed by just any normal thing. It's a D8 that you are personally good with.
Mm-hmm.
You make the D8 better, so it becomes a D10.
Yep. So it sounds like when it comes to the baseline, the cap for that is D8, and effects would step that kind of die up.
Yes.
And I'm guessing it would be a similar thing with D12. So that would be stepping it up twice, or do we not go to D12?
So far, explicitly, the rules say that like things that step a die step up don't stack. So you shouldn't get a D12.
Mm-hmm.
I do have plans for a supplement that's all about adding the D12 as an option, but that is legendary things that are, by definition, better than you.
Mm-hmm.
Because the base dice for the Brachyr system is a D8. You roll a D8 for everything, so that's why the best tool is on par with you, and if you're good with a tool, you can make it better.
Mm-hmm.
So a D12 item is better than you.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And aside from tool, that's the main way that you would add an additional die. It's going to be D8 plus modifiers plus the tool die.
Yep. That is the main way. The other way, of course, is if someone is helping you, you add their tool die as an additional die.
Yeah.
You can only have 3 dice. You only ever roll 3 dice in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So having someone help you is useful.
Yeah.
I know we have at least one person in. Oh no, she hasn't played. Oh no. Someone in chat who has been wanting to play the system, but every time it's shown up, we haven't gotten to. Or did you? I don't know. Well, anyway, we'll focus on the chat, on the call, not the chat log. Yeah. I should close that.
Yeah. But with that in mind, I think one of the other things that is certainly going to be unique is having aside from having a more detailed approach when it comes to combat and combat options, which is always something appreciated in this monastery. But there's also the debate system, which is one of the focuses of the expansion book, State of Argument. Was that born out of just wanting to have a more robust approach to like conversations, to social combat and the like?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I wanted there to be a social combat concept, and I wanted the social combat to work almost exactly like combat, but just not using combat stuff. So you're not using your weapons, you're using your words, and so you can have a full-on debate in front of an audience, or you can just argue with a shopkeep, or like rally a mob, that sort of stuff, using the social combat rules as if you were fighting someone else, fighting some boss monster, or fighting a small band of enemies using combat.
Mm-hmm. Which I think there's been a few games that have attempted some form of social combat. The big one that's always going to come to mind, oddly enough, is Exalted, for how detailed it got with its social combat. But it is one of those things where a lot of people treat social encounters as a skill roll with maybe a little bit of extra paint on it. But ultimately, it's a case of lipstick on a pig.
Yeah, it's one roll solves the situation and you move forward.
But I have a few, and maybe this was the attitude that you had at the time, because this is something I've seen. That doesn't quite fit the fantasy. I think when people are thinking about doing those sort of social encounters, they're thinking of something akin to like the back and forth verbal sparring that you'd see in like a chamber play.
Yeah, exactly. Or in a chamber play, or a movie, or something where there is a scene based around 2 people having a discussion or an argument.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of systems, that just comes down to 1 skill check or 2 skill checks.
Yeah, and
then you move on.
If using chamber play is a bit too highfalutin for some, I'll bring up like the Ace Attorney series, or just any show that has the courtroom drama.
Yep. Yeah, Ace Attorney is a good example of that kind of situation. That's kind of what I'm going for in the example of the debate rules in the adventure and the core book.
Yeah.
It's that whole...
Especially since there's whole archetypes in multiple games and settings that can be described as the diplomancer.
Yes.
The kind of thing that, say, the bard ended up evolving into over the years, which allowed it to escape not have the same problem that some classes of its time did. But the if not the bard, then the faceman, the fixer in something like Cyberpunk, the person who the grifter in some games, the person whose main thing that they bring to the table is being able to talk people in and out of the room.
Like, that's still possible in the Brachyr system.
Yeah.
And like, you can go all in on being that kind of character and not have anything in combat, but still be able to support the rest of the party in a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Or be someone who has absolutely nothing in that sort of thing and still be able to contribute in a debate.
Yeah. Which is a good thing to have, because in some cases where you have these things divided into those subsystems, you can have a situation like with the way hacking is treated in a lot of cyberpunk games, where anybody who doesn't have the hacking setup is just sitting on their hands.
Yep.
And whenever I've brought this up, I've often heard people say, well, just have more than one hacker. People don't design their parties like that.
No, they don't like stepping on each other's toes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the phrasing that comes up the most often. I don't want to step on anyone else's toes.
Yeah. And that's not me defending that. That's just how people will. If somebody's doing the fighter in a fantasy game, the other people at the table are going to be a little less inclined to do fighter.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one thing that, like, that and a problem that I've seen with, like, exemplified by Pathfinder 2, both of them together have kind of led the charge on my wanting to set this system up so that it is so heavily incentivizing people to work together and interact.
Mm-hmm.
And in the playtest so far, it's been very easy for people to just fall into the mindset of helping each other. Your character, even if they're not doing anything else, can be helping someone else in the main scene, so that they're contributing to some extent. It's detrimental to you to not be contributing, even if it's not quote unquote your scene.
Yeah. In other words, it sounds like there is an emphasis on the party being a team rather than a collection of individuals. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm guessing that's accomplished by the fact that at any point you can use that aid mechanic to give somebody that third dice.
Yes, exactly. And people think they're pulling one over me by spamming that, but that's the point. I want them to spam it. The system is designed with it in mind, that you are helping each other constantly.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, when it comes to the combat end of things, I did obviously it's on that same sort of tier approach, but do you consider this to be a game that leans itself more to theater of the mind style combat, grid combat, or something in between?
Something in between. It does have grid combat rules, but the only reason I've set that grid combat to hex is because I like hex combat. If you don't like hex combat, you can switch it to grid. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter, as long as people know roughly where everyone is, and you can help each other out. If you want to switch to theater of mind, go for it, as long as you have a consistent way of converting from the hex information in the book to theater of the mind. I don't care.
Which
so it's somewhere, as long as you are consistent at the table, it doesn't matter.
For your particular playtest, which have you leaned into?
Hex. I very much went with hex because I wanted to see more of that in play, and it's worked well.
Yeah, I can certainly get that, especially since there aren't a whole lot of games that use hexes. I think when a lot of people think of hex-based battles, oddly enough, they're not going to be thinking of any RPG per se. They're likely going to be thinking of BattleTech.
Yep, BattleTech. You also see it, like, a lot of vehicle combat in different systems. I know one of the Star Wars systems uses hexes for starship combat. Same with Starfinder.
Yeah, that'd be Edge of the Empire that does that. Or rather, the Star Wars trilogy. Edge of the Empire was the first, so that's what I use as my association on that. Even though ship combat didn't really dive headfirst in that thing until Age of Rebellion.
Yeah. And I have seen that it works. It works better than grid combat for the purpose, like better than square grid combat for the purposes of ship combat in Pathfinder.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I see it a lot in vehicle stuff, but not so much in personal combat. It works fine.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think one of the appeals with hexes is it's a little bit trickier to have the kicking circle.
Yes. Yes, it is.
That's not to say it can't happen, you just need more bodies to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It also means that when it comes to trying to set up blocking or that sort of positioning, it's not as safe.
No.
There's always a way around.
Yeah, there's always a way to slip around.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why it's good to have two people blocking. Hey, look.
Mm-hmm.
Innate teamwork encouraged.
Yeah. Pretty much. And I will admit, when it comes to looking at the setup with the combat, I kind of hinted at this earlier, but I appreciate that with the powers when it comes to combat, it's a lot of the problems that I have with games and how they handle, say, melee combat isn't as much of a factor here because your choice of weapon is important beyond a damage number.
Yeah, because it affects what you can do with that skill.
Mm-hmm. And while each one has its own unique mechanics, but not as extensive as some of the other pillars. What I did was that something that came out of just wanting to make combat more than just the one-trick pony show like it is in some of the more ubiquitous games.
Yeah, I wanted there to be a distinct difference and a purpose to taking certain combat skills. I wanted there to be a reason that you would go with this weapon rather than this one, and things that you could estimate by looking at an opponent. They're using that weapon. What can we guess they'll be able to do?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we synergize using a variety of weapons in the group? While maintaining in the system the concept of you don't actually have to be trained in any weapon to use it. You're just not going to be as good as someone who is.
Yeah, because everybody wants to have the improvised weapon moment that we see so often in fiction, whether it be improvised table legs in a tavern fight or the extreme version, which is I will beat a man with another man.
Yep. I have that image living rent-free in my head at all times.
Mm-hmm. And I've accidented my way into improvised throwing weapons being other people, which was basically an excuse to use the fastball special.
Yep.
I made sure to do it on October 10th because that is National Throw Short People Day.
I did not know that.
Yeah, apparently that's a thing. But the other thing to note with it is given that grid combat is an option. In your experience, how do you handle things like reach when you don't have that kind of spacing that you would have on the hex grid?
There is one step reach,
mm-hmm.
one step beyond the normal hitting the things adjacent to you. There are those every point extending from the points of the hexagon you're in have a line coming out of them. The vertex has a line coming out that it shares with the two hexes adjacent to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that line points to an additional hex, and that hex is the additional reach. So it's like one step of diagonal in the weird sense of a hex concept. And then you just have shells of hexagons leading out of you for further reach.
And I can certainly get that. And I know that I had said that there wasn't a whole lot when it came to managing particular numbers for casting, but I think one of the things to note is the momentum system. How did that come about?
Yep. I liked momentum in Scion, specifically Scion Second Edition, but I don't want the whole reroll thing. I liked the idea of the party being able to generate a pool of resources that anyone can draw from for heightened ability character use. So you've got everyone can contribute to this pool as a teamwork thing, and then people can draw from it for special moments for themselves as just a way to encourage cooperation. And that worked really well. I saw in 2 playtest groups people doing their damnedest to generate as much momentum as possible, as fast as possible. It wasn't particularly useful for their group. They didn't have much to use it on, but they just loved generating it.
I could see that, and I remember Warhammer Fantasy 3rd Edition having the idea of individual fortune pools as well as a shared one.
Yeah.
And since I brought up FFG Star Wars, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up how that game handles light side and dark side points, where it's a shared thing on both sides, but spending 1 point converts it to the other. So the GM spends dark side points to make the player's life interesting, but each time he spends one, it gets converted to a light side point.
Yeah, and that's roughly something that's happening with momentum in the Brachyr system, because we've got even enemies can have all the same stuff that you have for using momentum, but if they would use momentum, instead the party gains momentum.
Which is a good way to illustrate a push and pull kind of approach.
Yeah. Because the GM pulls out this thing that makes things difficult for you, but it does give you a little bit of leeway to work with.
Now, when bringing new people into the game, do you end up having people asking questions about things like the traditional attribute spread, since that isn't present here, at least in the usual sense? Like, a lot of games will have a list of attributes and skills, and you just have the skill/power approach.
I haven't, but that's mostly because when people have a look at the rule book and just have a look at that first page of information about the rules, the one time someone did mention that, their comment was, "Oh, so this works like Skyrim." I'm like, well, okay.
Although you actually have decent melee combat, so it's kind of disqualified from the Skyrim comparison there.
I mean, true. Thank you, but it's more to the point of you don't have control over what other systems would call ability scores or base stats, that sort of stuff. It's just what you're trained in.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And with that in mind, is there anything you can think of that was in Brachyr early on that ended up kind of getting weeded out, or just iterated out with time and play testing?
Give me a moment on that one. Because things got, like, if anything got iterated out, it was out very early.
Yeah, I know you
Since
mentioned
most
the
of it
die pool approach.
Yeah, well, yes. Like, I wanted to. There was a period where it was you could have more than 3 dice, and it quickly became apparent that adding too many numbers together in a fast situation can be annoying, and so it got boiled down to the 3 dice and whatever modifiers apply to that situation. And the other one I think would be, I originally was trying to go for a DC modifier system similar to D&D 3.5 or Pathfinder, which is what I was used to at the time. And I eventually gave up on that because it didn't fit the vibe of the setting, it didn't fit the concept of the system. It was just, and I'd have to come up with every possible circumstance or consequence. So I went with a different approach that streamlined and worked a whole lot better.
Yeah, it's one of those things where what a game evolves into sometimes isn't what it was initially, and there's good company for that. I mean, Rollmaster started out as a bunch of house rules before it became not that.
I mean, if you want to go to that extent, the setting for this system, Nazveen, started out as a setting I was building for D&D 3.5 and putting in all the things I liked, and then adding my own things until it got to the point where I went, hey, wait a second, 3.5 doesn't actually properly support this setting. I'm going to look for other systems that do. Oh shit, no system supports this setting, and in particular, it's 9 types of magic. I guess I've got to make one myself. So if you want to go that far back, D&D 3.5 got iterated out.
Yeah, I can see that. And while terms like DC is still used, I look at that as a vestige.
Yes, it's a vestige that's kind of ubiquitous in the TTRPG space.
Yeah,
just because of the grandfather nature of D&D.
Yeah, when I was writing Legend Edition, we did have DCs at one point, but right around the time of right before the OGL fiasco, I changed it to TN.
Okay.
And it's still an aim high thing, and it's still a D20 based approach. Although someone can't bring their D&D character into my system without having to blow the whole thing up and start from scratch. But it was just a case of doing find and replace throughout the text.
Yeah, be careful about the wizard there, though.
Yeah, I have to make sure to put extra Z's in, otherwise Rincewind will get mad. Sorry, wrong wizard.
Yeah, wrong wizard.
Or right wizard, depending on how familiar someone is with Discworld. But with that in mind, I know you've put out a couple follow-ups, one for combat and one for debate.
Yep.
What is next on it? Do you plan on giving a similar treatment to Magic?
Well, at the moment, it's the one for debate is specifically for the education skill. The one for combat is specifically for the unarmed skill. I want to do one for every skill, but next on the docket at the moment is a bestiary, specifically focused around rodents and that kind of creature. So it's rats, squirrels, dire rats. In this particular one, the rat bomb, which is a fire elemental rat that will explode upon death. As well as magic regarding rats, gear regarding rats, and their impact on the lore and how they can be used thematically, tonally, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the next one on the docket. I've also been working on the world map for quite some time, and I plan to put that out alongside the navigation skill, which is a MISC skill.
And I suppose this made it a bit easier because of the fact that so much of the game is built around those skill trees as mentioned. So you can have types of animals or monsters that are like just represented through that as a way to allow GMs to make custom monsters, which is something I really think should be more standard than it is.
Yeah, it's weird looking at some systems and seeing a fleeting mention of, oh, well, you can make your own monsters. Cool, how? Or a massive rule set for how to go through and meticulously balance and make monsters. Yeah. When in the Brachyr system, at least, I'm trying to design it such that you can make them the same way players make characters.
Yeah,
or at least a little faster.
There were a lot of games, especially in the early 2000s, that did that whole monsters and characters are built the same way. But that ended up actually creating brand new problems because it meant that it was difficult for monsters to really stand out. I think having creature specific talents in this case is a good workaround.
Yeah, it's a way of having an option that is specific only for monsters, but still works the way player stuff does.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, players have access to most skills species other than their own. Like explicitly, it's every skill except species other than your own. So monsters can just have other species skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can get that. Now, with that said, I'll certainly be looking forward to seeing how Brachyr develops with time. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Of course.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Fair enough. Cheers to that.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
오年完成を しく